Jesse Ray returned to his ranch after just 2 nights away and found a tall, silver fence circling every inch of his property. The metal glinted in the morning sun like it belonged around a prison, not a patch of Texas land where he'd come to retire. The fence didn't touch his house, his barn, or even a single tree on his land. Instead, it wrapped around all 40 acres with eerie precision, leaving Jesse on the outside looking in. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked up to the padlocked gate. A thick chain wound through the metal bars, and bolted dead center was a white plastic sign with bold black letters, "Private Property, Pine Brook Meadows HOA. No trespassing." Jesse stood in silence for a long moment. He rested one calloused hand on the gate, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. But the cold of the steel and the sharp edge beneath his fingers told him this was real. This was deliberate. He shook the gate once. It clanged in reply, stubborn and solid. His gaze followed the fence line as it curved over the crest of a hill and disappeared among the wild mesquite. It didn't look slapped together. It looked surveyed, measured, funded. His land hadn't changed. Same red soil, same barn roof catching the light, same post oak tree with the tire swing he'd put up for his niece last fall. But now, it was all behind a wall he hadn't built. The Dodge pickup coughed to life as Jesse turned the key and headed down the familiar road toward town. Bluebonnets danced along the shoulder, oblivious to the barbed insult behind him. He passed by his old neighbor Clyde's place. The porch swing was still empty, and the flag beside it fluttered listless. At Peggy's place, the door creaked like it always had. The inside was quiet, just the low murmur of a radio playing Merle Haggard and the clink of silverware on ceramic. Jesse took his usual booth by the window. Peggy didn't ask. She just set down a steaming cup of coffee and said, "You look like hell, Jesse." He nodded, hands wrapped around the mug. "Morning, Peg." The waitress, a girl in her 20s with a ponytail and a notepad she didn't use, came by with a plate. Grits, sausage links, eggs just a little too runny. Jesse hadn't said a word. "It's on the house today," Peggy added from behind the counter. Jesse didn't argue. He stirred the grits slowly, thinking. This land was supposed to be his reward. After 2 decades of hauling hoses into burning buildings and carrying people out, he'd finally bought peace. He called it unfenceable peace. No neighbors, no sirens, no red tape. Just sky and soil. Now it had a gate with a lock, and a logo that had never meant anything to him. He glanced around. A few of the regulars were there, truckers, mechanics, a school bus driver eating in silence. But none of them looked his way. That silence told him they'd all seen the fence already. Back on the road, he pulled over just short of the gate and stepped out. He walked the short gravel stretch again, this time slower, more careful. He followed the shadow the gate cast across the ground and noticed something. The gate's support post wasn't sitting flush on his own boundary. It angled slightly outward, like it had been purposefully planted just beyond his land line, on a tiny patch of earth that jutted out like a forgotten tooth. Jesse knelt, touched the edge of the post with his fingers, then looked at the dusty soil where the grass hadn't fully grown back. The dirt had been packed recently. The gate didn't stand on his land. It stood on someone else's. Maybe only by inches. Maybe just a sliver. But it might be enough. He didn't go back to the house. He didn't even try calling the county yet. Instead, he slid back into the truck, pulled out his phone, and scrolled until he found a number he hadn't used in a while. The ringtone played once before a familiar voice answered, casual and surprised. "Darnell here." Jesse didn't waste time. "I want to know who owns the land under that gate." 3 days later, Jesse returned to the fence, but this time with a deed in one hand and the gate key in the other. The morning was dry, with a light wind tugging across the flat land like it wanted to stir something loose. Jesse's truck creaked to a stop just off the shoulder of the road, the tires nudging up to the edge of the triangle-shaped strip of land he now owned. It wasn't much, 5 feet across at its widest, a forgotten scrap carved from a decades-old land survey, but it was enough. He stepped out slowly, one boot hitting gravel with a firm thud. A worn folder poked from the inside of his jacket, the county seal barely visible through the smudged plastic sleeve. The key was in his right hand, brass and solid. It felt warm, almost alive. On the other side of the fence, Pine Brook Meadows was in full suburban bloom. Folding chairs formed neat rows under a white pop-up tent. Children ran past lemonade tables. Someone strummed a fiddle near a Bluetooth speaker that crackled faintly with country music. Grill smoke floated over the manicured lawn like a flag of quiet privilege. Jesse didn't wave. He didn't nod. He walked calmly to the center of the triangle, where the gate anchored itself into the ground with steel posts and too much pride. Darnell had come through like he always did. Jesse had barely finished asking when Darnell said, "Give me 48 hours and a favor later." 2 days later, he handed Jesse a name, a parcel number, and a price lower than a good saddle. The maintenance shed came with it, a bonus that Darnell, chuckling, had called God's little middle finger. Inside the shed, Jesse had found the key. He unzipped his tool bag and pulled out 2 wooden stakes and a cedar board. With steady swings of a hammer, he drove them into the earth. The sign read, "Private property, no access, trespassers will be prosecuted." The sound of the hammer carried through the field. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. "Hey," someone called. "That's HOA land." Jesse didn't look up. He kept hammering until the sign stood straight, unmoving in the breeze. Footsteps approached. Fast ones. "Excuse me," the voice barked. Jesse stood and turned. Donald Snipe was every bit the HOA figurehead, crisp polo shirt, name badge clipped to the breast pocket, loafers too clean for any real work. 2 other men followed, carrying clipboards like shields. "What do you think you're doing?" Donald demanded. Jesse didn't speak. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out the folder, unfolded it, and held it out. "This triangle," he said, "is not HOA property. Not anymore." Donald hesitated, eyes scanning the document. One of the clipboard men leaned in. "That's a deed," he whispered. "It's fake," Donald snapped. "No," Jesse replied. "It's recorded and filed. Check with Hector down at the county office if you like." Donald opened his mouth again, but Jesse had already stepped toward the gate. With a smooth motion, he slid the brass key into the padlock. Click. The chain unraveled with a metallic sigh, and the gate swung inward. Jesse walked through like he'd never been locked out in the first place. On his porch, Lucky the horse flicked his tail and snorted. Ranger barked once, a low, friendly sound. Behind Jesse, silence rippled through the crowd at the HOA picnic. Children stopped mid-run. A man dropped his plastic cup of lemonade. Even the fiddle cut out for a beat. Donald stood frozen, red blotches climbing up his neck. "You can't just waltz through." "I didn't," Jesse said without turning. "I unlocked what was already mine." He reached the middle of the driveway, then paused. "Turned slightly. And I'd recommend updating your access map. Wouldn't want to confuse public and private again." He pocketed the key and walked on. From the edge of the crowd, his eyes caught a new face, a woman standing still beneath the shade of a narrow-limbed pecan tree. She wore a charcoal gray blazer and held a clipboard tight to her chest. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze sharp. From the crowd, Jesse notices a stern woman watching silently, Beatrice Langford, HOA's legal counsel. "You're trespassing on community property," Donald snapped. Jesse blinked. "This is my land." The morning heat came early that day, clinging to the porch railings and baking the gravel road into a pale shimmer. Jesse stood just inside the gate, arms crossed, watching the line of vehicles inch down the road toward him, 2 black SUVs and a silver sedan with tinted windows. They parked without invitation, the doors swinging open in near unison. Out stepped Donald Snipe first, flanked by a younger man in khakis and a woman in business attire. Jesse recognized her instantly. It was the same woman from the HOA picnic, the one with the unreadable face. She didn't look like someone who wasted words. Jesse didn't like her already. Clyde sat on his porch across the field, rocking slow. He lifted a styrofoam cup in greeting but didn't smile. Donald adjusted his badge and stepped forward. "Mr. Ray," he said, voice too formal, "we're here on behalf of Pine Brook Meadows and the Community Development Board." Jesse didn't move. "I didn't call a meeting." "You're standing inside a designated green perimeter," Donald continued, flipping open a folder. "As of last week, this area has been proposed for reclassification." Jesse raised an eyebrow. "You built a fence around my property and now want to claim I'm inside your lines?" The woman stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Beatrice Langford, legal counsel for the HOA. We've submitted rezoning documents to the county. Technically, your property sits within the secured visual corridor of Pine Brook Meadows." "Visual corridor?" Jesse repeated. "That a real thing or something you made up on a treadmill?" Beatrice didn't blink. "It's recognized by Community Development Code under subdivision guidelines. Your barn's visibility impacts aesthetic continuity." Jesse took a slow step forward. "Ma'am, if you're suggesting my horses are offending your rooftops, I suggest you take that up with nature." Donald stiffened. "We're offering mediation before this escalates." "Oh, this is the polite part." Jesse reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "Hang on." He scrolled briefly and tapped a contact. The line rang once. A clear voice answered, "Travis Ray, attorney at law." Jesse tilted the phone, letting the speaker carry his cousin's voice into the heat. "We've got some folks here claiming my land is inside their green perimeter," Jesse said evenly. "You on the ranch right now?" Travis asked. "Yep." "Put me on speaker." Jesse obliged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Travis began smoothly, "this is a recorded call. Under Texas Property Code, any attempt to claim jurisdiction over a private parcel without due process is considered trespass. You're standing on land that is neither zoned nor assigned to your organization. I suggest you leave now before we file injunctions and seek damages." Donald's lips twitched. Beatrice looked at the folder again, then closed it. "We'll be in touch," she said. Jesse ended the call. "I'm sure you will." They turned and walked back to their vehicles, but not before Beatrice paused halfway down the drive. She looked over her shoulder, her voice low and sharp. "We're not finished, Mr. Ray." Jesse didn't answer. He simply walked back to the gate, closed it behind them, and slid the padlock through with quiet finality. By late afternoon, he drove into town. The general store was quiet as ever. He mailed 3 letters, one to the county clerk, one to the zoning office, and one to a man named Barry McDougal, whose name Travis had suggested with a low chuckle and the words, "Straight shooter, hates HOAs." The clerk handed him his receipt with a cautious smile. "Heard you got some uninvited visitors." Jesse nodded. They left the same way they came. At Peggy's place, the waitress brought him coffee without asking. She leaned in just enough to whisper, "Watch your back, Mr. Ray. HOA folks don't play fair." That evening, as the sun fell behind the hills and the barn cast long shadows across the pasture, Jesse climbed up onto the porch with a drill and 2 motion sensors. He mounted one above the barn door and one facing the gate. Inside, he double-checked the battery packs on his trail cameras and fed the dogs extra. Just before night took the last of the light, he stepped out for one more look at the back fence. That's when he saw them. Red plastic flags dotted the ridge line, new, bright against the fading grass. And near the tree lean, 2 figures moved, crouched low, holding something that caught the moonlight. That night, Jesse sees red flags near his back fence, and strangers surveying again. The bulldozer didn't stop, not until Sheriff Daniels pulled up with sirens blazing. Jesse had been standing on the porch, sipping black coffee from a metal mug, when the rumble first hit. It was faint at first, more vibration than sound, but it rolled through the gravel like thunder in the bones. He set the cup down and squinted toward the far edge of the property. Dust lifted in a low cloud, crawling over the fence line. And then the machine came into view. Bright yellow, with a thick steel blade pushed low and slow toward the ranch. Behind it, two men in neon vests followed on foot, radios clipped to their chests and hard hats tilted just so. The machine moved with the confidence of permission. Jesse stepped off the porch. The bulldozer kept coming. He waved once, sharp, unmistakable. The driver didn't flinch. The blade gouged shallow into the dirt, cutting a strip through the land like it was marking ownership. Jesse took out his phone. Clyde had warned him, just 2 nights ago, as they stood leaning on the fence after dusk. "They'll test you with noise before they test you with fire," he'd said, sipping sweet tea from a jar. Jesse scrolled to Daniel's number. It rang twice. "You seeing this?" he asked when the sheriff answered. "Just passed it on the scanner," Daniels replied. "Already headed your way." 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the early heat. The bulldozer ground to a halt as the patrol car rolled in fast and kicked up dust in every direction. The driver finally lifted his hands, like it was some minor misunderstanding. Jesse didn't move. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, boots crunching sharp. He wore mirrored sunglasses and a look that meant business. "What's this?" he asked the crew chief, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We're clearing for a new road," the man said. "HOA's expanding access. We've got the permit." "Let me see it," Daniels replied. The man hesitated, then reached into a clipboard pouch and handed over a folded document. Jesse watched Daniels scan the paper, his jaw tightening. "This seal's fake," he said flatly. "And this name here, he's been retired 2 years." The man shrugged. "We were told it was cleared." "By who?" "HOA board." Daniels looked at Jesse, then pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, send Barry McDougal to the Ray property. We've got unpermitted work and possible fraud." 30 minutes later, a faded county truck pulled in behind the cruiser. Out stepped Barry McDougal, chewing sunflower seeds and holding a clipboard thicker than a phone book. He wore a BOLO tie and a permanent squint. Barry walked the new road inch by inch, muttering as he measured, paced, scratched notes. The bulldozer idled behind him like a guilty animal. By the time Barry circled back, his expression had changed. "They're building through private land with no notice," he said. "This road's illegal. No record, no plan filed, no zoning clearance." Jesse nodded once. "That what I figured." Barry turned to the crew. "Shut it down. Now. If that blade moves another foot, someone's going to jail." A golf cart rolled up then, shiny black with tinted sides. 2 men in navy polos stepped out, both wearing earpieces and mirrored shades. One had a laminated HOA badge clipped to his chest like it meant something. "This is a secured construction site," the taller one said. Barry raised an eyebrow. "And I'm the county zoning inspector." The shorter man stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to vacate." Barry let out a short bark of laughter. "Son, you just told a state-licensed official to vacate county land being paved over with fake paperwork. I suggest you back up before this gets real." The golf cart men didn't reply. They turned and rolled away without a word. Jesse stood still through the entire thing, arms crossed, watching it like a slow parade of foolishness. By dusk, the equipment was silent. Jesse sent Barry on his way with a nod and a promise to follow up with the county attorney. Daniels left with a warning to the construction crew. The sun was low when Jesse stepped into the kitchen and scooped beans into a pot. He ate at the table, just beans and cornbread, nothing fancy. Ranger lay at his feet, one ear twitching at every creak. Outside, the fields had gone still again. After supper, Jesse walked the perimeter one more time, flashlight in hand. At the edge of the barn, he paused, looking toward the spot where the bulldozer had pushed too far. A soft growl from Ranger made him turn. The dog was facing the barn, ears high. Jesse squinted, and saw movement. 2 hooded figures, barely more than shadows, slipped between the barn and the fence line. One carried a red gas can. The other raised something shiny. That night, security camera catches 2 hooded men sneaking into the barn with a gas can. All I did was build a fence, Jesse told the camera. They built a war. The camera lens didn't flinch. Neither did Allison Price. She stood steady in her boots just outside the gate, clipboard tucked under one arm, mic in the other. Her cameraman crouched beside her, panning slowly across the property, lingering on the charred patch of grass by the barn and the drone wreckage Jesse had retrieved from the fence line. Jesse kept his voice low and even, eyes shaded beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just told it straight: the fence that locked him out, the land he legally bought, the bulldozer that nearly crushed his porch, the gas can, the cameras. This land was supposed to be my retirement, he said. They turned it into a battlefield. Allison nodded, jotting a final note. We're airing tonight. 6 o'clock. Jesse simply nodded, then turned and walked back toward the porch. Ranger followed, tail twitching. By mid-afternoon, the Travis County Spring Fair was in full swing. Strings of lights hung from poles wrapped in bunting. There were booths with homemade pies, fireman chili, and jars of pickled everything. A fiddle band played under a canvas tent while folks two-stepped in dusty boots. Kids chased each other between hay bales and lemonade stands. Jesse didn't bring a banner. He didn't bring a protest sign. He brought 2 horses and a rope line. He tied up Lucky and Maggie just outside the arena and let them stand tall and calm as kids ran up wide-eyed. One little boy with freckles and grass-stained jeans reached out cautiously. That's Maggie, Jesse said gently. She won't bite, unless you tell her she's ugly. The boy laughed. His mother stood nearby, watching with a tight smile. Jesse recognized her. She lived in the HOA development. The boy, Ben, she called him, climbed onto the hay bale Jesse set out and ran a brush over Maggie's side with care. Clyde showed up not long after, carrying a carved walking stick and wearing his old VFW cap. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but he stood beside Jesse during the whole segment, arms crossed, eyes sharp beneath his bushy brows. By the time dusk settled, Allison's van had already packed up. She'd filmed Jesse walking the fence line, feeding the horses, pointing out the damage by the barn. She'd interviewed Daniels, who said on record, "The man owns the land, and the law backs him." That night, Peggy's diner was louder than a Friday fish fry. The TV over the counter switched from weather to the 6 o'clock news, and there she was, Allison Price, standing in front of Jesse's gate. The headline at the bottom read, "HOA gone rogue, Texas rancher fights back." The footage rolled. Jesse's voice. The aerial drone clips. Barry McDougal's county report on the fake road. Allison's closing line, and all this, over a fence. The diner went quiet. One man in coveralls set down his coffee. Another leaned forward. A couple near the window who'd never spoken much at all said at once, "That's him." By morning, the phone at Pine Brook Meadows HOA office rang so many times their voicemail crashed. Their Facebook page flooded with angry comments. Veterans from across the state reposted Jesse's segment. Ranchers sent photos of their land with signs that read, "Unfenceable." At the fair's second day, Jesse arrived to find a line of folks waiting at the fence, not to protest, but to shake his hand. Some brought pies, others business cards. A retired schoolteacher gave him a framed print that read, "A good fence doesn't lock you out, it keeps the peace." The kids came back too. Ben ran straight for Lucky, holding up a drawing of the horse he'd made. His mother smiled quietly. Jesse crouched down beside the boy, admired the scribbled lines, then handed him a cowboy hat just his size. Then Donald Snipe appeared. He wore a suit this time, and a forced smile. In one hand, he held a cream-colored envelope. "You're being served," he said, thrusting it toward Jesse. Allison, standing nearby, lifted her mic. Jesse took the envelope, opened it slowly, and read. Then he held it up for the camera. "Cease and desist," he said. "For blocking HOA easement visibility." A woman in the crowd chuckled. Another booed. Jesse handed the paper back. "Tell your lawyer I already got zoning on speed dial." Donald turned red, muttered something, and slipped back through the fairground crowd like spilled oil on a dance floor. Peggy's place ran out of pie that afternoon. People from out of town asked to sit where Jesse usually did. One couple offered to buy his coffee. Someone left a handwritten note at his booth, "Thank you for standing up." That evening, the sky was soft and orange. Jesse sat on the porch, watching Ranger chew a stick and listening to the frogs start up near the creek. The mailbox flag was up. He walked down the driveway slow, whistling under his breath. Inside was a single envelope. No return address. He tore it open on the steps. The letter was printed neat, official-looking. The heading made his stomach tighten. Notice of foreclosure, unpaid HOA infrastructure dues, $17,000. At dawn, Jesse parked in front of HOA headquarters and hammered a notice to the glass, "Eviction, you're trespassing." The sound echoed across the empty lot, sharp and sure in the early morning stillness. The HOA's building looked as polished as ever, glass facade gleaming under the pink wash of sunrise, 2 miniature flags fluttering by the entrance, and a perfectly trimmed hedge that spelled out Pine Brook Meadows. But Jesse didn't slow his swing. The paper was taped to the center of the glass doors, just above the keypad where board members punched in. In thick, black print, it read: "Official notice, trespassing on private property. Cease operations immediately. Owner, Jesse Ray." He stepped back, took a breath, and waited. Minutes passed before the first car arrived. Then another. By 7:30, the small lot was half full, and a cluster of employees stood frozen by the curb, unsure whether to enter. The silence broke when Donald Snipe pulled in, tires crunching too fast, suit jacket already rumpled and sweat blooming beneath his collar. "What the hell is this?" he shouted as he stormed up the steps. His eyes locked on Jesse, then on the notice. "Read the fine print," Jesse said calmly. Donald tore the paper down. "You can't evict a legal office." "I'm not evicting an office," Jesse said, producing a small, leather-bound folder. "I'm removing unauthorized occupants from land they don't own." Donald's hands trembled as Jesse handed over the deed. Behind him, Allison Price appeared, microphone in hand, cameraman already rolling. "We're live in 3, she said to no one in particular. Beatrice arrived just then, hair pulled back tight, lips pressed thin. She said nothing, but her eyes darted between the cameras, the deed, and the growing crowd of bystanders gathering near the sidewalk. Jesse turned toward Allison. "You want the summary?" "Please," she said, holding up the mic. He opened the folder to the recorded deed, stamped and notarized just 2 days prior. "This narrow strip of land," he said, pointing to a map overlay, "runs directly under the foundation of this building and the front parking lot. It was sold by the original landholder decades ago to an adjacent rancher." "That rancher?" "Mr. Ernest Walker." He looked up. "And now it belongs to me." Allison blinked, then slowly turned to the camera. "You're saying the HOA headquarters is built on land they don't legally own?" "I'm not saying it," Jesse replied. "The paperwork is." Behind them, Donald's voice cracked, "This will never hold. You'll be laughed out of court." "Then why are your hands shaking?" Jesse asked, just loud enough for the camera to catch. Beatrice finally stepped forward, reaching for the deed. Jesse let her study it. She flipped pages with practiced fingers, lips moving silently as she scanned the legal lines. Then she closed it slowly and handed it back. "We'll file for temporary injunctive relief," she said. "You do that," Jesse replied. "Just be quick about it. Sun's coming up fast, and you're already trespassing." By midday, the news segment was viral. Allison's clip, titled, "You Don't Own Your Foundation," had over 200,000 views by lunch. Real estate blogs ran with it. One headline read, "HOA built on lies, rancher flips the ground they stand on." Peggy called Jesse to tell him someone from Dallas had driven 2 hours just to see the gate. Clyde showed up that evening and didn't say much. Just stood at the edge of the driveway, gave Jesse a long nod, and tipped his hat once before heading back down the road. Jesse didn't feel like cooking. He opened the fridge and pulled out a leftover pork chop and a cold piece of cornbread. No microwave. He didn't feel like turning on lights either. The dusk settled around him, warm and soft. He hummed an old Willie Nelson tune while slicing meat at the counter, the same way he had in younger years at Firehouse Kitchens. Ranger circled his legs, ears twitching. The house was still except for the humming. Then the lights flickered. And went out. The fridge gave a soft groan and died. The overhead fan slowed to a halt. In the silence, Ranger lifted his head and growled low, facing the back door. Jesse moved toward the porch, the room lit only by a single candle on the table. That night, Jesse's power is cut. Ranger barks into the darkness. Under a silver moon, Beatrice Langford stood at Jesse's gate holding a flash drive, and the look of a woman who'd finally had enough. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She just waited, arms stiff at her sides, her face lit half by the flickering porch light and half by the glow of Jesse's cigarette as he stepped into view. Ranger stood beside him, silent but alert. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Beatrice was still in her blazer, though the sleeves were wrinkled, and one heel had sunk into the gravel. Her hair was messier than Jesse had ever seen it, windblown, tired. "I'm not here on behalf of the HOA," she said. Jesse exhaled slowly. "No briefcase." She held up the small flash drive, silver and unmarked. "I figured they'd go too far," she said, her voice dry. "I just didn't think I'd still be on payroll when they did." Jesse stepped forward, keeping a respectful distance. "What's on it?" "Everything. Emails. Internal memos. Maps. Scanned documents. A draft memo marked confidential, rezone now. Force compliance later. Sabotage plans." She hesitated, then nodded. "Not just against you. Other residents. But yours is the worst." Jesse took the flash drive. "You know what happens next." Beatrice looked up at him, and for the first time in weeks, the steel in her gaze was gone. "I want them buried." "You know what they say," Jesse murmured, eyes steady, "don't dig a grave unless you're willing to climb in after them." "I'm already halfway down." She turned and walked back into the night, shoes crunching lightly on the gravel. Inside, Jesse placed the flash drive gently on the kitchen table beside his folded court summons. He picked up the phone and called Travis. "Got something," he said. "You'll want to see it before the hearing." Underscore 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 underscore. The courthouse was packed by 8 the next morning. Rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, local reporters, and more than a few curious strangers who'd seen Jesse's story on the evening news. Peggy was there in a floral dress. Clyde sat at the back in a clean VFW cap, nodding faintly as Jesse entered. Judge Carol Ames took her seat at exactly 9. She was tall, gray-haired, and wore reading glasses with thin black frames. Her gavel sat untouched for now, but no one doubted she knew how to use it. The HOA board sat to the left, Donald Snipe, beet red and fidgeting, 2 other members whispering behind clipboards, Beatrice's seat, empty. Jesse sat on the right with Travis beside him, wearing a sport coat that looked borrowed but clean. "All rise," the bailiff said. Travis stood slowly, cleared his throat, and began. "Your Honor, this case is about more than property lines or fencing permits. It is about an organized attempt to pressure, punish, and push out a lawful landowner." He handed the judge a binder. Timeline of events: illegal fencing, forged construction permits, surveillance, drone sabotage, and the most recent, power line tampering. The room held its breath. Then Travis clicked a small remote. The screen behind him lit up. "Submitted last night by a whistleblower," he said. This flash drive contains internal HOA communications, emails from board members, digital maps, planning memos, and this. He clicked again. An email popped up, projected large enough for all to see. Subject: Enforce visibility buffer. Body: Rezone now. Force compliance later. If Ray resists, initiate stage 2, utility disruption and legal delay. Judge Ames leaned forward, squinting at the words. Then she turned the page in her binder and read aloud, voice like gravel on granite. Accuse noncompliance even if outside HOA bounds. Use public nuisance statutes as cover. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Allison Price's cameraman zoomed in. This, the judge said slowly, is an attempt to fabricate jurisdiction. To create a paper trail of falsehoods designed to override a citizen's rights. Donald Snipe shifted uncomfortably. One of the board members coughed. Judge Ames looked up. The Constitution protects landholders from unlawful seizure. And this is not a gray area. This is black ink on white paper, with bad intent. Then she picked up the gavel. She didn't slam it. She placed it down with sharp, deliberate force. The court rules in favor of Mr. Ray. Effective immediately, all claims by the Pine Brook Meadows HOA are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing a formal request for a criminal inquiry into the actions of the board. Gasps rang out. Jesse didn't move. Bailiff, the judge said. Please detain the board for questioning. The deputies moved fast. One stepped behind Donald, who stood frozen, mouth slightly open. Another approached the others, guiding them up from their chairs. Handcuffs clicked shut. Allison's camera swept the courtroom in a wide pan, stopping on Jesse seated at the rear of the room, arms crossed, eyes steady. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. Just beyond him, Clyde gave a slow, silent nod. Jesse returned at once, just enough to be seen. Deputies cuffed Donald Snipe and board members on the spot. Allison Price's live feed pans to Jesse watching from the back, saying nothing. At 6:45 a.m., the first post of Freedom Arena went into the dirt, and not one soul from the HOA could stop it. The auger drilled deep with a low hum, steady and sure, as the sun pushed over the rooftops of Pine Brook Meadows. Four flatbed trucks stood at the edge of Jesse's land, engines ticking as they cooled. Workers in flannel shirts and denim unloaded lumber and hay bales with practiced rhythm. One of them, an old rodeo hand Jesse knew from his firehouse days, waved a hammer overhead and hollered, "We're live, boys." Jesse nodded once, boots planted firm in the dirt, then turned toward the archway being framed at the entrance. The sign would go up by noon. White paint on red slats. Bold letters, no flourishes. Freedom Arena. Built on the strip of land they tried to pave over. Built for the town that rallied behind him. Built not in vengeance, but in joy. Clyde arrived with a folding table strapped to the back of his truck and a worn canvas bag of American flags. "Didn't figure I'd ever decorate a rodeo again," he said. Jesse just smiled and helped him stake the corners. By mid-morning, Ben and a few other kids from the neighborhood were threading red, white, and blue bunting through the fence rails. Ben's mother stood nearby, chatting with Peggy and Sheriff Daniels, who had shown up with a pot of chili in one hand and a jug of sweet tea in the other. Allison Price, back with her camera crew, filmed quietly from a respectful distance, letting the moment breathe. "This one's not about scandal," she'd said on arrival. "This one's about healing." At noon, the sign went up. A crane hoisted it over the gate. A cheer broke out as it swung into place. Sheriff Daniels wiped his hands on his jeans and offered Jesse a second bowl of chili. "This land still got your name on it?" he asked. "Bolder than ever," Jesse replied. A mail truck rumbled up the side road as the sun crested high. The carrier handed Jesse a single envelope, cream paper, clean handwriting. He opened it while leaning against the arena's post, squinting in the light. "Dear Mr. Ray, we sincerely apologize for what was done to you by the former board. I hope you'll accept this letter as a beginning, not an end. We've disbanded the old group. I'm the new acting president, and I'd like to rebuild trust, not enforce it. If you ever feel like joining our next community event, there's always room for you at the table. Thank you for reminding us what community really means. Emily Caldwell, Pinebrook Meadows HOA. Jesse folded the letter slowly, slipped it into his back pocket and said nothing. But when he passed by the new bunting on the gate, he tugged one corner straighter. That night, the first soft opening barbecue lit up the back ridge of Jesse's land. Strings of porch lights hung from newly planted fence posts. A fire pit crackled near a stack of hay bales turned into makeshift benches. Clyde tuned a battered fiddle while kids roasted marshmallows on sticks taller than they were. Sheriff Daniels served bowls of chili. Peggy handed out tin plates of ribs. Allison didn't film a word of it, just danced once with a retired schoolteacher and laughed like it mattered. Ben rode a miniature pony in slow circles around the arena, both hands gripping the saddle horn. He waved at his mother, who clapped with the crowd. Clyde wiped his eyes and blamed it on smoke. Jesse stood at the grill, flipping burgers with quiet focus, apron dusty, face calm. He didn't need to say anything. Not tonight. The music played long after dark. Folks lingered with plates on their laps and their feet kicked out toward the fire. When the last guest rolled away and the last ember dimmed, Jesse walked up the porch steps with Ranger trailing behind. He eased into his favorite chair, boots propped on the railing, and looked out over the land. The porch light hummed. The grass swayed soft. In the distance, the Freedom Arena stood dark but solid against the stars. Ranger curled beside him with a sigh. Sunrise would come soon. Jesse, boots up on porch rail, Ranger asleep by his feet. Sunrise over land now truly free. Under the quiet morning sky, the dust had settled and the laughter returned, not just to Jesse's land, but to the hearts of those who once looked the other way. What began with offense became a lesson in resilience, in standing firm when the rules are bent to serve the powerful. Because when good folks stay silent, bad rules grow roots, but when they speak up, even the deepest foundations can crack. And sometimes, all it takes is one gate, one key, and one man who remembers what freedom's supposed to feel like.